What is up, YouTube? Welcome back to the Cutlass project build series, where I take this Cutlass wagon I found in this dude's backyard, pull it out of the weeds, and start tearing this thing apart. I'm building this car to be my next power tour car. It's going to be pretty unique, and you won't see anything else like it out there, at least as far as I can tell. I'm all about the unique cars, and this one is definitely up there. It's going to have a 3800 with an F23 5-speed manual, and a bunch of other really cool stuff to really set this car apart from the rest of them. So I've got a lot of surprises I'm excited to show off. I'm excited to dig in this thing, and I hope you guys are too. In the last few videos, you watched me tear this thing apart, pull out the interior, pull out the old engine, and then I swapped in this 3800 and an F23 5-speed manual. And in that video, I really only got the engine and transmission in the car. I didn't really hook up anything. So in this video, I'm going to start putting the exhaust together to try and find a way to make a T4 turbo fit inside of this car with a 3-inch downpipe. It is quite a squeeze, and by the end of this video I am just absolutely exhausted and over it, but check this out. It's gonna be cool, so if you're into that, stay tuned and let's just dive right into this project. Okay, so here is the exhaust right here that's going to be going in this engine, and this is just the off-the-shelf parts bin, W-body, downpipe, crossover, exhaust manifolds. It's all stock setup for a W-body. It'll all bolt up to the engine. Shouldn't have any problems with fabbing up manifolds or anything like that. It's all ready to go. The trick to make this work with the turbo is that you'll take off this downpipe completely, unbolt this, block that whole passage off, and I think I'm just going to cut this whole flange off, get rid of that. Now, some guys put their wastegate there instead, but I don't think I've got space for that in this car, so I'm not going to do that here with this one. I'm just going to probably cut that whole flange off, weld that pipe shut. And then over here we have the crossover itself, and this is where you put the turbo. So you basically cut this crossover, then you redirect that gas into a turbo. So then, instead of having all of your exhaust go from the front manifold down into the back manifold now comes forward. So all that exhaust gas starts going forward instead and into this crossover. So then you have basically a really simple turbo manifold. The crossover is going to come up and sit right there basically, and from there the turbo is going to be going this way. Now, some things that will help here is that I'm not going to be using this intake manifold. Sorry guys, it's not being twin charged, as this is just a mock-up engine. Plus it looks good. It does look really good in this car. It's hard to deny that supercharger looks pretty dang good, and it does make some cool noises, but it is inefficient. It is a heat gun of epic proportions. It does not make power. It's a very big limitation into power. So that's coming off, and that's going to give me a little bit more space here on this side to work with that crossover, because if you'll notice, with that crossover coming up this way, there's not a lot of room for a downpipe, and that's going to be my biggest concern. And then plus working around the shifter cables, I have some concerns, to say the least. Now, there are a couple levers I can pull here to try and make all this work. One would be to play with the dog bone, maybe move the engine back and forth to try and get some more space somewhere. And I am going to be limited by how much space I have in the front, because the radiator is going to be right here. So you can see here, there's not a whole lot of room for exhaust there if I do rock the engine forward to try and get some more space back here. It could also tack up the firewall as a sort of a last resort. So that's also an option. Maybe switch to, I don't know if there's a smaller brake booster out there for this that could work too. Another thing that I'm definitely not doing is a hood dump or a fender dump exhaust. Not for this car. I want this car to look very, very sleeperish. I don't want people to realize that this car could be fast. I want it to be very unsuspecting. I think the best option is to try and get the exhaust out back this way. Because once we get the accessories here, all this space is going to be taken up here. And you can see the front is getting pretty tight already. So yeah, so we'll see if we can get some of this stuff on here and see how that looks. So one of the first things I needed to do was to find some more clearance on the back side of the engine because it's such a tight spot between that and the HVAC box. So I started tearing apart that collector. The goal was to try to make this thing as small as possible so I can fit that 3-inch exhaust in that section there. Alright, so as anticipated, I'm running into some headaches here, some issues with this thing. You can see we got the front manifold on, that's all looking good. And crossover is in here too as well. And we have the rear manifold in here as well too now. So it's particularly tight right here on the shifter assembly. It's hard to tell, but it is actually contacting that thing right in there. It is not in a great spot here. So this is going to need some modification because I don't want this thing anywhere near the shifters because I don't want those things melting, and that could cause a lot of issues. And then we have the shifter assembly right here. This is the actual mechanism, so I want to try and steer clear of that as well too. And then of course we have the brake master cylinder, and then the booster, and then we have the valve cover here. So this is all very tight fitment here for that. So I have some ideas of how to fix this. I think what's going to happen here is that I'm going to have to modify this back manifold. I think I'm going to cut it there before it does that bend forwards, and basically try and get that thing to come out right up in here somewhere. The reason for that is I want to make sure I can fit the 3-inch exhaust pipe down here somewhere too. And moving this forward this way gives me some space to kind of sneak a 3-inch exhaust down into this nook right here, because I'll cut all this stuff out. And then it'll just go straight down that way too afterwards. Here you can see this is a 3-inch pipe right here, and even right now it can do it. It is just very tight. So it will fit in there, and that's kind of how it's going to be. But I'm going to try and get this to go, basically take the spot of this thing, or at least take half of that spot. And then that should give me plenty of clearance around the steering rack and the HVAC box, because right now it's so tight. It's way too tight around that. Again, worst case scenario, I can pull that dog bone forward a little bit more and try and get some more clearance out of that. I don't want to do that, but I can do that if I need to. So my plan to use that stock crossover and just plop a turbo on it obviously wasn't going to work out with the way I needed to fit this exhaust pipe in there. And I found out that this front manifold is actually cast iron, so I couldn't cut it and just weld it with the big welder I have. So I went and bought the ZZP stainless steel power logs, so that way I can actually modify it. And plus, it's all going to look a little bit better anyway, so I figured I might as well just run with that. So from there, I went ahead and just started working on the rear manifold again and got that thing ready to go and plop this thing together. Alright, so this is what I've come up with. I've just kind of taken off that flange there and that. I've also taken off the EGR flange too, just kind of cut this thing right before that bend there. And it does kind of curve up a little bit, but I think that's probably going to work out in my favor here. And I can always kind of angle the pipe coming off of this wherever I need it to be. So I'm going to go ahead and put this on the car and see if I can figure out how I'm going to fit some of this other stuff on here. And I'll put on that power log too as well to replace that front pipe, and just kind of mock up how things are going to fit. The next thing I had to do is figure out where this turbo is going to sit, how I'm going to get exhaust pipes routed into it, and it's such a tight fit, so I went back and forth a few times to try and figure out where this thing is going to get placed. This here was my first thought. So I got this thing about as high as it can go right now, and really I want to angle this thing down a little bit so that way it's already kind of facing towards that direction and get this intake this direction, which means making this exhaust go basically like this. So this front half would have to come up this way and somehow do like a quick 180 through here while not hitting this AC line that goes from here to back there, and not hitting this AC line which goes from here to the compressor that's going to be over there. AC is staying in this car. There's no reason to not have AC in this car. Obviously, there's pie cuts. You can do pie cuts to make this exhaust pipe actually fit a little bit better, but I don't want to do pie cuts. I want this all to look really good. At least I want to actually try this time. No promises. It might not look that good anyway. Oh, and the other challenge is fitting the wastegate. So this is the wastegate right here. So it's a precision turbo wastegate. Ideally, this goes something like this, faces straight downstream into the exhaust. So the challenge with that is find a way to make all this fit here. Thankfully it's pretty small, so this might actually be okay to get this in there like that, maybe. I'm not sure. And the other challenge with that too is you want to make sure that the exhaust actually flows into it. You don't want to have it at a 90-degree angle. I learned it the hard way with this car. So you want to keep the exhaust flowing into it. It's that way it's not trying to make any sort of hard turns. People will prioritize the wastegate. I don't think we need to worry about that too much in this car. I think what I'll do is, if there's an issue, I can always run a lower PSI spring in this car. Not as much control, not as predictable, but that's a possibility if I'm getting boost creep. Man, I don't know right now. This is tight. All right, so I think I've got a plan here now. I think the turbo is going to sit pretty much right where it's at right now. This is going to give me the closest I can get to some good clearance, I think. This gets this AC pressure switch away from the exhaust turbine, and this also gives me a route that I can do a UE at the front half of the exhaust and then have them merge together here as sort of like a 3-inch exhaust tube, and probably a 90 straight into this pipe. And then I can put a wastegate flange on this and then have that go kind of this way and then straight back into the exhaust, the exit that side. It's probably the closest thing I'm going to be able to get to an almost equal length on the exhaust between the two banks. Ideally, you want both banks to be pretty similar in length to give you the best sounding exhaust possible in this engine. The stock headers on a front-wheel drive car are just, you have different lengths between the two banks, and that just gives it that weird, awful sound they have. Given this thing this equal-ish length is going to be the best shot of making this thing sound decent. Now the front one will be a little bit longer than the rear, I think, with this route. So it's really going to be, the rear is going to come out that way, come up, meet this one this way, then probably about right here I'll cut it and do like a 3-inch exhaust into this here, and it'll be like a straight 90 into that turbine housing there. It won't be a twin scroll housing then. The housing obviously is twin scroll, but it won't be utilizing a twin scroll just because it's ideally you have one bank going into one side and one bank going to the other side, and this gives you a faster spool time. So it's not a big deal to have that, I don't think, especially on a car like this where this thing is just going to be revving pretty high all the time. It's just going to be the nature of the way this car is put together, so we'll just deal with that and not worry about it. But this is how it's going to sit, I think, and I'll clock the turbo differently. So this charge pipe is going to be more of a direct fit down this way, and then I can actually put a cone filter in here, hopefully. And if I have to take off this bar, I'm okay with that. I don't really care about this bar. I don't think it's doing any good. You know, I've ran these cars without these bars before, and it's not been an issue, at least the W bodies, and this seems like it's just a small W body as far as I can tell. It's very similar, at least in the front half. The rear is totally different. It's like a minivan in the back. Got some ideas, got the direction to go here at least, and you know, we'll see how this goes. All right, so I've spent the last couple days playing video games, and I'm ready to get started in this car a little bit here. But now I've got some welding gas here, so I've got some tri-mix. Going to be doing some MIG welding here with stainless steel, and I've got some stainless steel wire, not a big spool of it, so hopefully this project doesn't consume that whole wire and I don't need to go buy some more. Now I'm going to go ahead and do some work here to try and get this exhaust started. So I'm going to go ahead and start doing some cutting of this back pipe. Just try and mark where it's going to be, and it's probably going to be somewhere like that. So I'll get that cut there, then I can tack that in and just start cutting, tacking, cutting, tacking, cutting, tacking, and then cut and tack some more. So I did go ahead and buy one of these tight radius T4 flanges. I don't know if I'm going to use it completely yet here. I just want to make sure I had that option if I needed to do that. So I thought I was going to do that, but I'm not so sure right now. I'm just going to see where this all kind of comes together and how close I can get it. So this will use this 45 here somewhere probably to go to the V bend, to the 180 degree bend, and somewhere in there. I'm going to try not to block this fill port if I can. If I do have to block it, I'm going to try and make it easy to get off if possible. So I don't think I'm going to get the easy maintenance I want with this. It's going to be a compromise. Not going to lose sleep over it. It is what it is. This is what happens when you build a car like this. Some stuff gets in the way. You can't get to things. It just becomes more difficult. So you make sacrifices. All right, so this is what this looks like right now. I've got that back pipe kind of tacked in. What's cool about this, having that V-band there, is that I can kind of get this angle right where I want it to be. I can move this pipe around. I guess I have it too tight right now, I can't do it, but I can rotate it upwards, rotate it downwards. And I'm trying to just make sure it clears everything here with a decent amount of space. So there's that shifter down there that has some nylon and plastic bushings on it. I'm trying to keep this a little bit away from it. Thankfully heat rises, so this will keep that heat away from there a little bit, because that's the part I'm most worried about. Steel lines aren't as concerning right now, and I will be wrapping this whole thing in heat wrap, which I think should be able to contain a lot of that heat, hopefully. So I might just do a whole bunch of layers here in this section to keep that heat away from there. So I think that's the plan for that. And I could keep this thing a little bit further down too. I could rotate this whole thing and get a little bit more clearance if I need to. I'm just not quite sure where I want to put it, just to make sure it clears everything inside of here. So it could come down a little bit. Just want to make sure it doesn't hit that shifter assembly at all. Keep it kind of clear of that. And actually where I just put it now seems a lot better than where it was at. And you know, thinking about the brakes, I don't want that brake fluid to boil. This car is going to have some pretty small brakes on it, so just going to have to try and be a little careful with that. That way I don't ruin the brakes in this thing. And I'm not sure if I'm going to put a flex pipe in this one yet. I know you kind of want a flex pipe for some compression and expansion under heat, otherwise it'll crack. I wonder if a flex pipe is the lesser of two evils when you compare the cracks with the exhaust leaks and the weak connections, because these things are going to be under pressure and they're not really made for it as far as I can tell. At least I haven't had one that actually has lasted, and there's mixed results on the internet with this stuff. So I'm not really sure if I'm going to run a flex pipe. I think, thinking about it right now, I might be leaning towards running the flex pipe, and if so, I'd probably set it somewhere in here or right over here. But the plan would be then to have this pipe go up here to get this thing angled up and angled backwards the way this stock pipe would be. Then once it starts to make that angle and it becomes flat, this piece will come in here and it'll bring all the exhaust back around this way and meet up with this one. And then the two of these together here will go to a 3-inch pipe, which goes to the turbo and to the wastegate. So that's the plan, and I think if I get this just about right, I could clear that oil fill cap on the transmission. At least on these, the downpipe is going to take that spot. The goal will be just to make sure that that transmission fill is fine to get to, at least with taking one pipe off. I don't want to take off 2 pipes to get to it. And it'll just be something you check when it's cold, and you don't ever go to it when it's hot. But this is coming along, I think. I've got a plan now. Won't be my best work. This is my first time welding stainless steel, and it is a little bit harder than I thought it would be. I'm used to welding mild steel, and it takes a lot more heat than I thought it would, and it still kind of puddles at the top of it. It doesn't actually like flow to the side at all, which is tricky. And I'm using the right gas too. I'm using a tri-mix with some stainless steel wire, so I'm doing all the right stuff that I know about. But we'll get through it, and if I have to grind some pipes, I'm okay with that. I think I might have to order a flex pipe. I think I'm going to do that. Yeah, I think I'm going to do the flex pipe, just because I want this thing to be a good, reliable car that doesn't break. So this might be where I have to call it for tonight then. All right, so I've spent the majority of the day getting this thing tacked up. I'm not proud of this. It doesn't look that great. The location is super tight, but there's not a lot I can do about that. I think I've got it in a pretty good spot though. The real trick is just making sure this thing fits around this AC line, these brake lines, this shifter, this clutch line, and also the radiator hose that's going to come out right here. And also making sure the turbo has a spot for the intake on it and the charge air to come out of it. So it's kind of a lot going on here. I think I've got the best compromise that I can do right now. I think this is going to work out fairly well. We'll see. I still need to tack up some of this stuff. I'm not proud of the way these welds look. As much as I don't like the way it looks, it's coming along. It could be worse. So there's that. So I started working on fully welding everything on the crossover and the front manifold and the back manifold. And I had to do some serious massaging to this back manifold to give this thing enough room for the downpipe. So I had to take that flange off this thing, basically cut off this part of this oxygen sensor bunk, and smash this whole thing down until it has some good clearance here. Take off this little bolt mount here for the exhaust heat shields. Obviously the EGR pipe had to come off of here. The EGR flange had to come off. And now I think I've got pretty close to a smooth transition through here. That should at least give me a bit more room there in that back half. So it is really tight. I'm trying to be as cautious as I can about keeping the heat out of places where we don't need it. Just so you don't have issues on road trips. And you can kind of trust this thing with as many miles as you want to without having to worry about something melting on this. So I'm most worried about that downpipe right now because that is crazy tight for a 3-inch pipe. I'm hoping I don't have to go to a 2.5 inch, but a 3-inch should still fit there, I think, with some good massaging and some tight bends around that exhaust manifold. Biggest hurdle, I think, of this whole swap is this exhaust and the clutch pedal. But otherwise, though, it's coming along. Once I knock this thing out, I think I'll be on the home stretch. So we'll get to it. Okay, so I've got this thing back in the car now, and finally figured out kind of where the turbos are going to sit. I've got this thing clocked where it should be, I think. I've got the oil feed at the top now, oil drain at the bottom, and also have the compressor wheel kind of where I want it to be too. So the idea is that the compressor wheel is going to shoot out the compressed air out of this side and through this little gap in the fender here. It's not going to be a straight shot. I'm not sure how much I'm going to regret putting it like that. It is what it is, though. This is probably the best spot for it that I can see in this car. It's going to clear the radiator hose that's going to come out of here and then to that. So that should clear that nicely. It also clears a lot of the AC lines. It gives me enough room here to do a downpipe out this way, and also it gives me almost enough room for a cone filter, so that's going to be kind of tight. I figure worst case scenario I could have like a 45 off of this and have some sort of weird angle out this way or something, and then just kind of, cut through all this. So yeah, I think this is in a pretty good spot right now. So the next thing I'll have to do here is start mocking up some of the downpipe. So I'll put the V-band on here. This is a 3.5 inch pipe here. I need to get this down to a 3 inch. I do have a reducer for that. But again, this is looking pretty tight. I mean, this is aiming straight towards this pipe right here. So I need to get this thing to come up a little bit and do kind of like a, almost like a 45 up and then a 45 back down and then a 90 down. But this should clear some of this stuff here now. I've got a bit more space there. So hopefully that all works out. It is going to be tight though, so hopefully I can make that fit there. Whether I need to oval out one of the pipes or not, we'll find a way to make this work and make this fit in here. What's kind of cool is that you have the little logo here, front and center, which is kind of cool. You can see this when you look at the car, so that's pretty funny. That's kind of cool. I mean, this is like a cheap Chinese turbo, so nothing worth bragging about, but it works really well. It's going to work really well for this engine and the stock cam deal. It worked great when I was in this car, so this car should be really good for that turbo. So the plan will be to have the wastegate right here, basically, so somewhere right in here, flowing right out of that pipe and into the downpipe. One of the biggest struggles about cutting up a 45 out of a 90 is just trying to get that thing square and tight. And I can't really do that with the chop saw I have, so I had to resort to using an angle grinder with zip ties to kind of mark out where it's going to be. It worked out pretty well, and I was able to get some of this exhaust sorted here with not too terrible angles. I have my exit coming up from the turbo as a 3.5 inch V-band, going to a 3 inch reducer to a bit of a up bend here, about a 30-45-ish up bend, and then back down the rest of it. And then over here I have another down bend there too, going into this back section where you can kind of see it starts to bend down a little bit before it really needs a lot more clearance around that HVAC box. And that's the part where I'm Not sure how I'm going to make this all fit here, because as soon as it leaves that spot, it needs to get ready to go bend itself into that downpipe section. My plan right now is to just kind of mark where that HVAC box is on this downpipe and just beat the fun out of it until it thins out quite a bit, and hopefully I don't oval it out too much where I need to put on my 90-degree-ish bend or 45 to get into that downpipe area. But you can see I've clearanced that downpipe as much as I can, or that back manifold as much as I can. Try and make all this fit. So I'll mark that thing and just start hammering on it to see if I can make that thing fit. Okay, so apparently I didn't get any videos of this process, but what I ended up doing is I basically heated this thing up with a torch and then clamped it down with the vise to squeeze it until it got pretty much flat enough to fit in that section. One of the most difficult parts about that process is that I had to cut this thing in the middle of that bend and somehow fit a 90-degree mandrel, really a 45, to get it down into the downpipe section of the car. And so I had to basically squeeze down a mandrel bend in that section too to get it to match that bend and still squeeze down. It was just not pretty, it was not fun, and trust me, you didn't miss anything. At the end of the day, I was just happy to move on and get past this. Alright, so after a lot of work, I have the downpipe kind of where it needs to be, and it's actually round, which is an accomplishment based on the location it's in. And I pretty much got this downpipe resting on that back manifold to give me as much space as possible. So it is pretty tight against that black box you can see there. But I do have at least a finger width of space there, which is not great, but could be worse. Hopefully that's enough clearance, and I'll probably hammer this thing out a little bit more to try and get some more space there on it. But I think that's going to be enough to prevent fires at least. All right, so coming up top here, this is what this looks like now. And I'm not completely satisfied with it, but it's one of the best things I can do in this condition, at least. So here you see it exits the turbo, have a bit of a downward angle on it, so I had to kind of rotate it upwards a little bit before I could come back down. And then it comes back down that way, almost a straight shot to kind of clear that master cylinder and the brake booster. Have about an inch of clearance there. And a little bit of clearance on the valve cover too. Then back here you see how it goes flat, which is like almost like NASCAR style. I can probably get that to go a little bit flatter though, I think, to give me a bit more clearance there, but it's something. It's better than nothing. I'm gonna have to put in a 3-inch V-band somewhere in this thing. I'm not sure where yet, to try and make sure I can get this thing in and out more easily. This still needs to go on there too somehow at some point. It needs to have some sort of flex, because this engine will rotate back and forth, so it needs to have some flex there on that pipe. So that flex pipe needs to go in there somewhere somehow. Not sure. Worst case scenario, I can cut the floor pan. I'd rather not, but I can do it if I need to. I'd rather not though. So at least I've got this done somewhat. I have some idea of what's going to happen now. I just need to spend some more time thinking about this and trying to mock some more of this stuff up to see if I can make this all fit more. It's not a bad look. It looks all right now, and it'll look a lot worse once I get the wastegate in here probably, but it is what it is. This is where it's going to sit. It's probably going to be on an angle like this and probably shoot directly into the pipe, I think, just to clear the master cylinder and give it this nice flow directly into it. That should be pretty cool, and still show off the bling. I want to show off the bling. I'm gonna have to think of a way to make this intake look cool too in all this. because this exhaust does look pretty cool on some of this here, right now at least. So things to think about. All right, so just to show you guys how tight this is the tunnel here. Here's the flex pipe. Yeah, can kind of fit there if I rest it on this side over here. There's maybe gonna be an inch in the top and nothing in the bottom, or 3/4 in the top and very little on the bottom. This is how tight this is. The best case scenario is it goes in something like this, leaving just a little bit of room over here on this side and a little bit over here too. You need to have a flex pipe in here because this pipe that's up there, that's going to want to go up and down and up and down and rock with the engine. You want to have some sort of flex here, that way you're not trying to force that on the rest of the exhaust. So now I have this pipe. I'm trying to figure out where I need to cut this to get the right angle on this, and I think it's going to be something like this. So I'll just look at it from the side here, get this kind of level where it needs to be, and then figure out how much of an angle I need in that. Alright, so I'm fitting this inside of the car, and this pipe is getting pretty long already. So at this point, it's getting difficult to get this inside and outside of the car. I think this is going to have to get cut up. I need to get a V-band in this, that way I can actually take this off in sections, because there's not going to be space anywhere here for a V-band. So I need to get something inside of this section. And this is my closest shot, I think, of making something work, is right in here. It's the closest thing that's round, because over here it's definitely not round as you get over there. It's not quite round here, but I can maybe make it more round. So I think I'm going to cut it here and try and fit a V-band in this thing somehow without throwing off my angles too much. But dude, I am stressing about this, because that's going to throw off all the angles, and it's not going to be a clean cut either. It's going to be, it's going to be awful. So I'm not excited about that, but it has to happen. It has to happen. There's no way I'm getting this pipe in there without that. So let's take care of it. Let's make it happen. So I was finally able to get that V-band in there, and thankfully make that thing a little bit easier to take on and off. Because that downpipe was getting pretty long there, and thankfully with that clearance from the transmission, I can get this thing on and off relatively easily, actually. That flex pipe though was still pretty tight. You can see there's not a lot of clearance on top, but my thoughts are that as the engine goes underneath load, it's gonna rotate towards, this direction. So this whole thing is gonna go back the other way. It's gonna rock downward. So this should give it more space up here. Heat goes up, so I think under most conditions it should be okay. And I can always give this flex pipe a bit more rock this way. It's tight though. It's not even a finger actually. So I'm thinking I'm gonna have to cut some of this. So I've got this piece of cardboard here because one of the things I've learned the hard way on the Grand Prix is that if you're cutting, you're grinding, you're welding, anything where there's sparks flying, if it hits a window, it's going to really damage that window, leave some sort of small pitting that you'll never be able to remove, and it's going to have like a texture to it. And you can scrape some of it with the razor blade, but it'll never be the way it was before. So I'm just trying to be as careful as possible here. So pro tip for you, keep your sparks away from your windshield. I just didn't know better. I don't know if that's common sense or not, but I'm putting it out there so you guys all know about it. Okay, so I have this cut up a little bit. I've got more of an angle on this than I probably actually need, but more clearance is better, and I was able to get the sides a little bit further away from the pipe too, so that's great. So it's really going to ruin the carpet, but we'll see what this looks like once that's all in there. All right, so I'm working on getting some little cutouts here for the tunnel there. Just cut up some cardboard to make this stuff fit pretty close, and I'll use these pieces here to fill in those gaps. I'm using 16 gauge steel here in this car. It looks like it's like a 14 gauge in the floorboards. I can't really tell. I have a gauge, but once you cut up that metal, it's hard to get in that section there, because it kind of explodes out at the end of it. You know what I'm saying? So that's the spot where it's going to go, and it's going to fill those gaps there, and then across that front section there, I'll just bridge that gap with weld, and that should be fine. Not worried about that at all. So I'm gonna cut this with the angle grinder. Got the good old death wheel on it, and we'll get those things on there, and hopefully be one step closer there. So I've got this thing pretty much set in here. It's physically, structurally installed, and I'm going to go back through with some sealer and just same way they did this with the factory seams. I won't use like this, whatever this foam type thing they're using is, but I've usually used like a roof flashing, so I'll get something like that in here, just seal up everything. That way keep some moisture and exhaust out of here, and I'll go through, paint this thing too on both sides. Keep it all clean too. So with that all sorted out, I wanted to start on some of the rest of the exhausts. I have a lot of stainless steel, and I want to use all of it here as much as possible. So I started working on the downpipe all the way back to at least the bend where it goes around the fuel tank, and try and sort out some of that stuff for now. This is where it goes down into that little tunnel, and you can see how it kind of curves and meets into this flex pipe and comes out straight here. I'm going to weld on this V-bend, and then eventually have another pipe here to go into the cat, and then from there we'll go out to the rest of the exhaust. I'll just use all the stainless I have. The rest of it won't be stainless steel, but I'll use the stuff I have here because the stainless could get expensive, and I already have the 3-inch stuff here, so I figure I might as well use it. Alright, so I've got the first section of the exhaust done, and I'll probably actually trim off some of this. I need to get this one to go at a bit of a different angle. It's not quite in 90. I'm pretty sure I'm going to cut this thing somewhere like right in here in that section, throw a V-bend on that, build out the rest of the exhaust over the axle and out the back here. This thing is just looking really good. I'm pretty happy with this thing right now. So that was about as far as I wanted to go on the back half of the exhaust. So at this point, I needed to secure the front half of it so that way it doesn't shake with the engine, and then come loose somehow and crack. So I started working on these mounts to try and secure this thing to the engine and to that back manifold. I built these out of 2-inch flat bar stainless steel, so right material for it, and I think it's working out pretty well. Alright, so I've got this top mount somewhat sorted here. Can I touch it? Is it too hot? Basically what this is going to do is it's going to get welded onto this piece here and then onto there as well too, and that'll keep this from moving a little bit. Then I'll have to just sort it out in the bottom too, but that should give me enough to keep this thing in this one spot, and I'll probably weld it somewhere right around there like that, I think, and just fully weld it onto the pipe and then smooth this out. Alright, so I've got my little brackets on the exhaust pipe now, and it's a lot sturdier than it used to be, so that's great. So here's the one out front. This one will hold it back and forth against the engine, and then down here, if I climb over the car, You can see the other one. Let me get some more light here. Yep. All right, and then down here you can see the other one, which will hold it down here as well too. And the thought is I had some space between these two spots where it bolted on. That way, this thing gets forced against that back exhaust manifold. They're so tight together, I figured might as well embrace it, get them as tight as possible. That way there's no sort of knocking or anything like that coming out of this area from like some sort of vibration. So they are basically touching each other, and they should not move much at all. I know exhaust is going to move when it flexes, but hopefully it's when it heats up it doesn't actually like break or anything like that, but we'll see what happens. So this part is basically done. Now I need to get the wastegate in here too, but unfortunately I don't have the right tubing for that. I thought I had some extra 1.5 inch tubing, but the stuff I have isn't stainless steel. It's like aluminized steel, so I can't use that. I've got some more stuff coming in the mail, so we'll get to that tomorrow, I guess, instead of today. So with the downpipe bolted onto the engine, that would hold the turbo where it's at, so I could actually start working on the wastegate now. So my pipes finally came in the mail, and I started to work on this thing. I'll tell you from experience, drilling a hole saw through stainless steel is a nightmare. I would shoot through so many bits just trying to make this work, and it was just 2 holes this time. I thought going through like an 18 gauge steel hole wouldn't be so bad, but it was still pretty gnarly on these little holes, but managed to knock this thing out and get this thing in there. Okay, so I have this wastegate perch on here. It's a little tight on both sides, but it's workable. It'll work there. I have the brace here too that goes to the intake manifold, and the other one to the other exhaust manifold, and then finally the oxygen center bung as well too. So with that, the exhaust is basically done. And we can move on to new stuff, other things. Get off the exhaust. So all this exhausting work is over. See what I did there? So that's gonna do it for this video, guys. Thanks for watching. I'll catch you in the next one.